Merry Christmas, everyone, and welcome back to Here Be Dragons. I'm Steven, you all know that, and today we're doing something a little different. A little different for you, but not actually that different for us, because this will be the third year that on Christmas Eve we all gather together as a HBD family, and Kelly reads us a Christmas carol. Um, I don't know why it started, but I was there for the first one. I was there for the second one. And when it was brought up this year, we were just like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's just everybody listen to Kelly read us a Christmas classic. Um, Anybody that wanted to join is welcome to join. I'm going to post the link that will get you into StreamYard right now in the chat, and you can come jump on as well. The only caveat will be like, while Kelly's reading, please be muted and let her do her reading. She's going to want to stop every once in a while, and that's going to be a good get a drink of water. Mm-hmm. And that'll be a good time to share any thoughts you might have at that time. But yeah, I just posted the link in the chat. If anybody wants to join, just click that link and come on. And if not, if you just want to stay in the chat, that's great. Stay in the chat. We're happy to have any and all of you. I am not a Christmassy person in general, but I love this story. It's great. Kelly, you're a frequent contributor here on the channel. Thank you for doing this. Yeah, and is there anything anybody wants to say before we get started?
Well, thank you for having me and hosting it as always, but also hosting it in the regard of being live on YouTube. That's adding an extra exciting element. But I do also want to say that I know a lot of our Slack family has had an absolutely crazy year. I definitely enjoyed Steven's birthday stream. It was wonderful and chaotic, which I think is just Steven's vibe. But also for a lot of us, we've had a really, really rough year. And for some people, I think it has been their worst year ever. So I'm going to congratulate everybody on making it through another year. And for, those of you that aren't a part of our Slack group, join. It's a lot of love and support and a lot of sarcasm and puns and memes. So it's like therapy. Our own messed up version of it.
It is. I found this meme I need to post. Join our Slack group, and you can see the meme I'm going to post soon. If you want to join our Slack group, send me an email to we3dragons@gmail.com. Our Slack group's been going for years now. We have this ongoing Zoom link that we use. The Slack group was first. And that Zoom link 2 years ago is where Kelly first read us a Christmas carol. You read about half on Christmas Eve and the second half on Christmas Day, and that's just kind of how we're doing it. So not only are we going to get through about half of it tonight, join us tomorrow and get the conclusion, the thrilling conclusion of the story.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I don't have my YouTube open, so I don't know who may be here and watching and listening, but
right now in the chat we have Danny McKay, Allison Kreutzberg,
Allison,
Cool Gamer, Plixiplox, Kolnitsky, and then obviously me. William has said hi in the chat as well. Jess just popped in.
Kolnitsky, Jess, good to see you guys.
And of course, awesome. A lot of folks are on the road with family right now, and by all means, enjoy the time with whoever you're with. Ooh, Rockin' Nessie.
I see Rockin' Nessie and Kartik.
But for those of you that are here, thanks for celebrating some portion of your holiday with us. And without further ado, Kelly, if you're ready, I'm gonna put you in the dominant position, and
Okay.
you just go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right, everyone. So if you're listening, if you want to join us, make sure you get your gayest apparel and go don it.
Correct, because a lot of you are just now coming in. Don your gayest apparel, and then click that link that I just posted in the chat, and you can join us here. All right, go ahead, Kel.
All right. We have A Christmas Carol, in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas by Charles Dickens. Stave 1, Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my own knowledge, what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined, myself, to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm going to relate. If we were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable in his taking a stroll at night in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot. Say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose, no pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what was the o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil-eyed dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, what was the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was a cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day. The candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices, like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard and by, and was brewing on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal, but he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug." He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What right have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said "Bah!" again, and followed it up with "Humbug." "Don't be cross, Uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle. "When I live in such a world of fools as this, Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer, a time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you? If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with 'Merry Christmas' on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas in your own way. Let me keep it in mine." "Keep it?" repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone, then," said Scrooge. "Much good may it do you. Much good has it ever done you." "There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say," returned the nephew. "Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I've always thought of Christmas time, when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin. If anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Let me hear another sound from you, said Christmas, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir, he added, turning to his nephew. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed, he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said what he would see him in the extremity first. But why? Cried Scrooge's nephew. Why? Why did you get married? Said Scrooge. Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if it were the only one thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Nay, uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel, to which I've been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. And so, a Merry Christmas, uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. There's another fellow, muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. My clerk, with his 15 shillings a week, and a wife and a family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam. This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let two other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe, said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years, Scrooge replied. He died 7 years ago this very night. We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been two kindred spirits. At the ominous word of liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed the credentials back. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some light provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir. Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. And the union workhouses? Demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? They are, still, returned the gentleman. I wish I could say they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor, then? Said Scrooge. Both very busy, sir. Oh, I was afraid, from what you said at first, that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I'm very glad to hear it. Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, returned the gentleman, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for? Nothing, Scrooge replied. You wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I've mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that. But you might know it, observed the gentleman. It's not my business, Scrooge returned. It's enough for a man to understand his own business, and not to interfere with others. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself and in a more facetious temper than was usual with him. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened so that people ran about with flaring links, proffering their services to go before horses and carriages and conduct them on their way. The ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always peepily, slyly down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible, and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds with tremulous vibrations afterwards, as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. The cold became intense. In the main street, at the corner of the court, some laborers were repairing the gas pipes, and had lighted a great fire in the brazier, round which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and winking their eyes before the blaze in rapture. The water plug being left in solitude, its overflowings sullenly congealed and turned to misanthropic ice. The brightness of the shops where holly sprigs and berries crackled in the lamp heat of the windows made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Poulterers and grocers' trades became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant with which it was next to impossible to believe that such dull principles as bargain and sale had anything to do. The Lord Mayor, in the stronghold of the mighty mansion house, gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as a Lord Mayor's household should, and even the little tailor, whom he had fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty in the streets, stirred up tomorrow's pudding in his garret, while his lean wife and the baby sallied out to buy the beef. Foggier yet, and colder. Piercing, searching, biting cold. If the good St. Dunstan had but nipped the evil spirit's nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using his familiar weapons, then indeed he would have roared to lusty purpose. The owner of one scant young nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound of "God bless ye merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay," Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog, an even more congenial frost.
Shall we pause for a moment? Let Kelly rest for a moment. Share any thoughts you might have so far.
I'm thoroughly enjoying the rendition and the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even nastier than I remembered him being from all the TV shows.
Well,
he's a nasty Victorian.
and Kelly is really kind of giving him that nasty edge in the voice department too.
Well, he's nasty either way.
They do say in the beginning he has a very gruff voice or a strained voice.
Yeah.
But also, like, I hope Charles Dickens never gets mad at me.
Yeah.
Because that epic takedown is a burn from which I would never recover.
Yes.
Oh.
Holy cow.
I mean, within and without, like just, ripping him apart physically and emotionally.
And
Yeah.
I also love that right from the get-go, we are told that the narrator on some level is a character in the story because he has opinions about things in the story. And that's really fun. Set up with like he's dead as a doornail. I don't think a doornail's the deadest thing. A coffin nail is the deadest thing, but like it's really fun way to start. And to let him and it continues to be that throughout the story. He does continue to have opinions on Scrooge's choices and whatnot. And
One thing
this is hilarious from Allison.
Yes,
For all
Allison.
you D&D players out there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's amazing.
Allison is playing her first ever D&D character in a brand new game.
Is she a bard?
She's a bard. Yeah.
All right. Get those Dickensian insults in there.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Just Google them. They're amazing.
It's funny because when you read that part, I also said, like, all I can hear is Gonzo.
Muppet Christmas Carol, yeah.
Yeah, because that's one of his early lines is that tight-fisted wheel at the grindstone line, and just I don't know. I heard Gonzo. I also like that. I also like that Scrooge's nephew has this like, there are things that have done me good from which I did not profit, and it really kind of just strikes the chord about how much Scrooge represents capitalism in a way, not as sort of like an avatar of capitalism. If that were the case, I don't think he'd be capable of change at the end. But
there is a quote from a British politician from the Victorian era, and that is basically what Scrooge also says is like, there's something like just get rich. There's something wrong.
Yeah.
Get rich and you'll be fine.
Like there's a solution. Just get rich, and that is basically
don't be poor.
Yeah. Peasants.
It's like there's something wrong with you because you're poor. Like that.
Well, that gets into like the prosperity gospel and prosperity.
We don't need to start that.
Yeah, we're not going there. All right.
I want one fun thing about nail making. In the Middle Ages, it was mostly women that made nails because there was a story about that. The person who asked for the nails for a crucifixion of Jesus Christ went to a smith and was like, I need some nails. And the smith was like, yeah, I don't want to be like deal with that. But his wife was like, yeah, give me the money. I will make the nails. So in like medieval guild systems and stuff, women were usually the nail makers just because, we do everything for money.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sure the customer was happy enough.
Also wanted to point out to anybody that didn't see the comment from earlier, humbug is like, basically he's saying Christmas is BS. It's a bunch of BS. When he's saying humbug, that's just Victorian thing. I had to look it up.
Yeah, that's good information. Thank you for looking it up.
Now
like we do a drinking contest though, or a drinking game. Whenever he has to say "bah humbug," hot chocolate.
It won't happen too much more.
It really doesn't. Like it's kind of his catchphrase, but it's only right the first part of the story.
Okay,
yeah, it's all over the first part. But yeah, after Marley, it's not going to be. Not going to be too many opportunities for it. So get your drinking out of the way now.
I'm going to mute myself, and you go ahead when you're ready, Kelly. I'm done.
Yep.
All right. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to his expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose, said Scrooge. If quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, said Scrooge, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. The clerk smiled faintly. And yet, said Scrooge, you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work? The clerk observed that it was only once a year. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December, said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide on Corn Hill at the end of the lane of boys 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at blind man's bluff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usually melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suit of rooms, and a lowering pile of building up a yard where it had so little business to be, and one could scarcely help fancying it must have run there when it was a young house, playing at hide and seek with other houses, and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now, and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost hung about the black old gateway of the house, that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, aldermen, and livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not an impenetrable shadow, as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by a breath or hot air, and, though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid color made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face, and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause, with a moment's irresolution, before he shut the door. He did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and the nuts that held the knocker on. And so he said, "Pooh, and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes its own.
Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly, too, trimming his candle as he went. You may talk vaguely about driving a coach and six up a good old flight of stairs, or through a bad young Act of Parliament, but I mean to say you might have got a hearse up that staircase, and taken it broadwise, with the splinter bar towards the wall and the door towards the balustrades, and done it easy. There was plenty of width for that, and room to spare, which is perhaps the reason why Scrooge thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. Half a dozen gas lamps out of the street wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose that it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of gruel. Scrooge had a cold in his head, upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room, as usual, old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, wash standing on 3 legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in, double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers, and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it, before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and paved all around with quaint Dutch tiles, designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds like feather beds, Abraham's, Belshazzar's, apostles, putting off to sea in butter boats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts. And yet, that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like the ancient prophet's rod and swallowed up the whole. If each smooth tile had been a blank at first, with power to shape some picture on its surface from the disjointed fragments of his thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one. "Humbug!" said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon the bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a great inexplicable dread that as he looked he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute, or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they begun, together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise. Deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming up straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming, the dying flame leapt up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling, like his pigtail, and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it very closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him, and looking through his waistcoat, could see the buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he never believed it until now. Nor did he believe it now, though he looked through the phantom through and through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before. He was still incredulous and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. "You're particular for a shade." He was going to say to a shade, but substituted this as more appropriate. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. "I can." "Do it, then." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that, in the event of its being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me," observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart, as a means of distracting his own attention, keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow of his bones. To sit staring at those fixed, glazed eyes, in silence for a moment, would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. He was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but it was clearly the case, for though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair, skirts, and tassels were still agitated, as by the hot vapor from an oven. "You see this toothpick?" said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though it were only for a second, to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself. "I do," replied the ghost. "You're not looking at it," said Scrooge. "But I see it," said the ghost, notwithstanding. "Well," said Scrooge, "I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug!" At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry, and shook its chain with such a dismal, appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "Mercy!" he said. "Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?" "Man of the worldly mind," replied the ghost, "do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. "I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man," the ghost returned, "that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel far and wide, And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turned to happiness. Again, the spectre raised a cry and shook its chain, and wrung its shadowy hands. You are fettered, said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me why? I wear the chain I forged in life, replied the ghost. I made it link by link, and yard by yard. I girded it on and of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Scrooge trembled more and more. Or would you know, pursued the ghost, the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain. Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. Jacob, he said imploringly, old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob. I have none to give, the ghost replied. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our own money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting up his eyes or getting off his knees. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob, Scrooge observed in his businesslike manner, though with humility and deference. Slow, the ghost repeated. 7 years dead, mused Scrooge, and traveling all the time? The whole time, said the ghost. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse. You travel fast, said Scrooge. On the wings of the wind, replied the ghost. You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years, said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry, and clanked its chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for a nuisance. Oh, captive, bound, and double ironed, cried the phantom, not to know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed, not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness, not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunity misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. Business, cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. It held up its chain at arm's length, as if it were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. At this time of the rolling year, the spectre said, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me? Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. Hear me, cried the ghost. My time is nearly gone. I will, said Scrooge, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob. Pray, How it is that I appear before you in a shape that you can see, I may not tell. I've sat invisibly beside you many and many a day. It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the perspiration from his brow. That is no light part of my penance, pursued the ghost. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer. You are always a good friend to me, Jacob. Thank you. You will be haunted, resumed the ghost, by 3 spirits. Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as the ghost's had done. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? He demanded in a faltering voice. It is. I think I'd rather not, said Scrooge. Without their visits, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over, Jacob? Hinted Scrooge. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us. When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it round its head as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound its teeth made when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again, and found his supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude with its chain wound over and about its arm. The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up his hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped. Not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear, for on the raising of the hand he became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak dark night. Scrooge followed to the window. Desperate in his curiosity, he looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty governments, were linked together. None were free. Many had been known personally to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost, in a white waistcoat with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle, who cried piteously at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant, whom it saw below upon a doorstep. The misery was with them all, clearly. They sought to interfere, for good, in human matters, and had lost the power forever. Whether these creatures faded into mist, or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. But they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window, and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable, and being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed, without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. That's the end of stave
Okay.
1.
That is a good place to take a nice pause. Kelly, you're killing it, by the way. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
For doing it.
It's awesome. Also, it's a good idea to just sleep with clothes on for the next 3 nights.
Right?
You're going to get dragged hither and thither.
Yeah, Like, might as well, have some good clothes on.
Yeah, good traveling cloak and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has appointments to make.
Mm-hmm. Why is the Lost Ghost like, I'm coming a bit earlier?
Yeah, I can't wait till 1. I gotta be there. I gotta be there an hour earlier.
Yeah,
Well, it's the ghost of the future, right? So I guess it just has to show up earlier.
I have another appointment later.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah. I was about to say,
Jolie and I are both 12-year-olds. I don't know if you noticed. You were busy reading, Kelly, but just to say it's a good thing we were both muted, because when Scrooge turned around to find his Marley in an erect posture, me and Jolie were both
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
an erect attitude.
and
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
direct attitude. I mean, come on.
All right, Marley and Scrooge is fine. Whatever y'all got going on, that's cool.
I mean, it has to be a really good friend to come back from the dead and try to save him.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hey,
they couldn't
he's-
have-
I don't think it's about being his friend. I think this is his penance.
Oh yeah.
Like this is his, but like, and then you get to that really creepy procession of the damned outside the window, and like there was a little bit of talk in the chat, Kelly, about that. Like, I don't really remember that scene ever because it's not in any of the versions that you like. It's not in. William said it's not in the Disney version. It's not in the Muppets version. I don't even know if it's in that really old 1935 version.
Ah, okay. I have read this book more than I have seen any of the other versions. All the movies, animation, Muppet Christmas Carol. Like I'm more familiar with this, so I'm gonna rely on you guys to point out any other major differences. But it gives me the creeps.
It's so fun, like gothic, just like
Yeah.
spooky. I love it. I'm imagining also like when London used to be so foggy with all the factory stuff, and you have like small, narrow, dark streets with like fog rolling in, and then all types of like ghostly figures. It is amazing.
Yeah.
Very creepy. It's got
All the alleys are overfilling with ghosts.
It's like
I move away. If I saw that, I just leave.
I also love the metaphor of like these are the chains that I forged in life.
I always cry like it's those of you that know me know that I cry at everything. But that is one of the moments that I just find so sad when Jacob is explaining his chain, and Scrooge is like, "You are fettered. Tell me why." And it's oh my gosh,
But
and
and that is the beginning motivation. Like he's still got a long way to go, but really, this all starts from Scrooge being afraid of ending up like Marley, which is probably maybe my only real critique of the story, is that change born out of fear isn't real change. But I also think that by the end, he has seen enough things that he has a new context, so that it's not fear-based. Fear was the initial motivator, but I don't think it's the end-all be-all by the end.
Well, it doesn't seem like he has a bit of a choice either. Like these ghosts are coming, whether or not he said yes or no. I mean, he even tried to get them all out of the way at once, which I didn't either.
I appreciate the efficiency of trying to get all the appointments done at once.
I mean, 3 nights of bad sleep. I mean, I'll put anyone in a mode of seeing ghosts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But yes, I will. As we start to meet Ebenezer's sister, I will tear up again. So please don't. Yeah. I will agree with that comment too. But
Yep.
yes, I will tear up a couple more times in this story. Just as a warning, I will be okay.
There's a reason it's still a classic to this day, that everybody loves this story. It's beautifully written. It's a great story, but his writing style is just next level.
It's well told.
His ability, like the house is described as like playing hide and seek with the other houses and getting lost. And I'm just like, who thinks to describe it that way?
Yeah.
You know, very few authors that I've experienced can really make me feel that way. Douglas Adams is another one. Like I'll always remember the
brick.
Vogon ship hanging in the air the way bricks don't.
Yeah, the way a brick doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah.
It's like when you complete a description, you're just like, then now there's a visual.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's painting a picture with words.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a reason this one sticks with us all these years later. And I think a lot of it is just his really creative turn of phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready to continue, Kelly?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Stave 2, the first of the three spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was dark, that, looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavoring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12! It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have gotten into the works. 12! He touched the spring of his repeater, and correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. Why, it is impossible, said Scrooge, that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It is impossible that anything has happened to the sun, that this is 12 at noon. The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and he could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after sight of his first of exchange pay to Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge or his order, and so forth, would have become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again, and thought and thought and thought it over and over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavored not to think, and the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again like a strong spring released to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered, on a sudden, that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and, considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously, and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong! 1/4 past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong! 1/2 past, said Scrooge. Ding dong! 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding dong! The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the 1-hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. Not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with an unearthly visitor who drew them as close to it as I am now to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were, like those upper members, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and, in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was, from the crown of its head there sprung a clear jet of light, by which all was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality, for as its belt sparkled and glittered, now in one part, now in another, and what was light one instant was another time dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts, no outline, would be visible in the dense gloom, wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again distinct and clear as ever. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if it were, instead of being so close beside him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, you are past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. "What!" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out, with worldly hands, the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and forced me through whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow?" Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend or any knowledge of having wilfully bonneted the spirit in any period of its life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." It put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that bed was warm, and the thermometer a long way below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had had a cold upon him at the time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. I am a mortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand. There," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall, and stood upon an open country road, with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground. "Good heaven!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice, that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. "You recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it!" cried Scrooge with fervor. "I could walk it blindfold." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, its winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them with boys upon their backs, who called to the other boys in the country gigs and carts driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits, and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music, and the crisp air laughed to hear it. "These are but shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us." The jocund travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten, and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas, as they parted at crossroads and byways for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas! What good has it ever done to him? "The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still." Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. They left the high road, and by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick, with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof, a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were little used. Their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach-houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and vast. There was an earthy savor in the air, a chilly bareness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and not too much to eat. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made bare still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the paneling, not a drip from the half-thawed water-spout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door, no, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence and gave a freer passage to his tears. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Suddenly, a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt, and leading by the bridle an ass laden with wood. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" said Scrooge, exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old honest Ali Baba! Yes, I know. One Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here, all alone, he did come for the first time, just like that. Poor boy. And Valentine, said Scrooge, and his wild brother, Orson, there they go. And what's his name, who was put down in his drawers asleep at the gate of Damascus. Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom turned upside down by the Janai. There he is upon his head. Serve him right. I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess? To hear Scrooge expending all of the earnestness of his nature on such subjects in a most extraordinary voice between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened and excited face, would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city indeed. There's the parrot, cried Scrooge, green body and yellow tail with a thing like a lettuce growing out of the top of his head. There he is. Poor Robin Crusoe, he called him, when he came home again after sailing round the island. Poor Robin Crusoe, where have you been, Robin Crusoe? The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. It was the parrot, you know. There goes Friday running for his life. There goes Friday running for his life to the little creek. Halloa, hoop halloo. Then, with the rapidity of transition, very foreign to his usual character, he said, in a pity for his former self, Poor boy, and cried again. I wish, Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff. But it's too late now. What is the matter? Asked the spirit. Nothing, said Scrooge. Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all. The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, Let us see another Christmas. Scrooge's former self grew large at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, and there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl much younger than the boy came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. I have come to bring you home, dear brother, said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. To bring you home, home, home. Home, little Fan, returned the boy. Yes, said the child, brimful of glee. Home for good and all, home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. That home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should. And he sent me in a coach to bring you. And you are to be a man, said the child, opening her eyes. And you are never to come back here. But first, we're to be together all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in the world. You are quite a woman, little Fan, explained the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him, in her childish eagerness, towards the door, and he, nothing loath to go, accompanied her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, Bring down Master Scrooge's box there! And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared at Master Scrooge with a ferocious condescension, and threw him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. He then conveyed him and his sister into the veriest old well of a shivering best parlor that ever was seen, where the maps upon the wall, and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows, were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine, and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered installments of those dainties to the young people, at the same time sending out a meagre servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but if it was the same tap as he had tasted before, he would rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time tied up to the top of the chassis, the children bade the schoolmaster goodbye right willingly, and getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the hoar frost and snow from off the dark leaves of the evergreens like spray. "Always a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered," said the ghost. But she had a large heart." "So she had," cried Scrooge. "You're right. I will not gainsay its spirit. God forbid." "She died a woman," said the ghost, "and had, as I think, children?" "One child," Scrooge returned. "True," said the ghost. "Your nephew." Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, "Yes." Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time again, but it was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. "Know it?" said Scrooge. "Was I apprenticed here?" They went in, at the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he might have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig! Alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out, in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer! Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow prentice. "Dick Wilkins, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. "Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick. Dear, dear." "Yo-ho, my boys," said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve." "Let's have the shutters up," cried old Fezziwig with a sharp clap of his hands, "before a man can say Jack Robinson." You wouldn't believe how those 2 fellows went at it. They charged into the street with the shutters. 1, 2, 3, had 'em up in their places. 4, 5, 6, barred 'em, pinned 'em, 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have got to 12, panting like racehorses. "Hilly-ho!" cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from the high desk with wonderful agility. "Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho! Dick! Cheer up, Ebenezer! Clear away!" There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off, as if it were dismissed from public life for evermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk, and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way, who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from the next door but one, who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In all they came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In all they came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couple at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, the new top couple starting off again. As soon as they got there, all top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But scorning rest upon his reappearance, he instantly began again, though there were no dancers yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home, exhausted, on a shutter, and he were a brand new man, resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dances, and there were more forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies, and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and the boiled, when the fiddler, an artful dog, mind, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. If that's not high praise, tell me higher, and I'll use it. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You could have predicted at any time that what would have become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance and retire, both hands to your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place. Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs, and came upon his feet again without a stagger. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 prentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost, and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks full of gratitude." "Small," echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices, who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why, is it not he has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps? Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, not the latter self. "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count him up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great, as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the ghost insisted. "No," said Scrooge. "No, I should like to be able to say a word or 2 to my clerk just now, that's all."
You've been
I'd
reading
go
for
out
30
like a
minutes.
psychologist.
There's a couple of things that I wanted to bring up anyway. So, Scrooge's own mother died in childbirth, and the only real connection he had with anybody was with his sister. I think he's estranged much from his father because of the death of his mother in childbirth. And then his own sister dies. in childbirth, giving birth to his nephew, and he's putting a lot of his unresolved grief on his nephew. But we also get that his sister comes back and says, "Oh, father's much kinder than he was, and he wants you to come back home." So I, in the moment, just was like, I wonder if he was visited by his Marley ghost somehow, and changed his mind and was like, "No, I really do want my son back in my life," which is bad that it didn't happen for him at that time. But it also kind of, you can better yourself all you want. That doesn't mean everybody around you is just going to magically get better as well. So I really hope for his sake that Ebenezer Scrooge's father, I hope he found whatever happiness he could in his later years. And it's unfortunate that his son couldn't be there for it. But not everybody gets to, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
That is, I think, also the point of like having him being visited by ghosts while he's still alive. Like, now you can change it when everyone is dead or whatever. It's like, it's kind of done. So you have to, yeah. Like for his dad, it came too late, basically.
Also,
It is not a wig.
I found out what a Welsh wig is.
All right.
Okay,
It's
what is
not a
it?
wig.
That is a Welsh wig.
I love it. I
Yeah.
want one.
Isn't it great?
It is. It was used by people like sailors and stuff as well.
I want one.
No, it's the wool production in Wales.
Mm-hmm. It's like it's a knit wool cap, but they all have this little like thing on the back of the neck to keep your neck warm.
I will say, like, after after it becomes not fashionable to have long hair, if men keep their hair short, then when you can wear a wool cap, but then the back of your neck is still exposed.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, this is to
Problem.
prevent the back of the neck being exposed.
Well, I had to look it up because they said he's wearing a Welsh wig, and full like my canon version of this story has Kermit the Frog in it. Just letting you know, and in that, Fozzie Bear is playing Fezziwig. He's Fozzie.
Yeah.
It was so easy, and the personality worked. But he's wearing like a powdered wig.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's not a Welsh
I
wig.
wonder if like the production team was just like, "Oh, it's a wig, right?"
They didn't have Wikipedia back then.
Right.
But yeah, it's not a wig.
Yeah, well,
their Dickensian consultant was
It's
off
also-
that day.
I was
it was
8
also-
years old when I found that out.
Also used by soldiers in the Crimean War. One of the cool things is because it's like a cap like that, you can put your like headgear on over it. Your like
It's like a liner for helmets and
Mhm. It
protection.
looks like it.
Yeah.
so
I'm not seeing any for sale, Kelly. So you might have to make one.
Okay.
I mean, it is pretty easy to make.
I was gonna say that looks like an easy pattern, honestly.
Oh yeah, it's so easy to make. I was looking at a couple, and I was like, oh, I can make that.
Oh, also the spirit is extremely creepy.
Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah.
yoked up, but with these little weedy legs.
But it's also like constantly fluctuating, like its physical
in and out.
state.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very creepy. Like it looks like an old man, but also a young child. Like, yeah,
It's
that's
like a time traveling thing.
it's nightmare fuel.
It is.
And
It
the
doesn't, like,
light
represent
that comes out
time.
of his head, that's a little, that's a little disconcerting too. Like, is that a halo?
Ooh.
Mm. It feels like it's a candle because the hat is literally a snuffer.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a representation of Christmas, so it's the light of joy and happiness. And there's a reference that the character makes to the fact that Scrooge was the one forcing them to wear the snuffer hat and snuff the light for so much of the time. It's a really well written story, so much packed into it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I love it. I again, not really a Christmassy guy for the most part. I'm an atheist, so it is what it is. But there's something, the social commentary of this story just makes it so relevant, and it removes any of the religious dogma. Doesn't matter to the story. Like, it's not even really a part of the story.
There's some religious
Very
themes
Nightmare
in
Before
that,
Christmas.
but
too.
yeah, it's not like being mentioned.
Right.
It has some themes in there that's definitely Christian and some I think Jewish stuff.
Probably.
So,
but they're not like talking about the baby Jesus died for your sins, and like
Yeah.
this really is a story about connecting with other people and changing the way you think about people who are less fortunate than you. Because I think that's the real message that was being sent by this. Was Scrooge in the first bit says if they're going to die, well, they need to hurry up and do it. Decrease the surplus population, and if they're poor, they just need to get rich, and then they won't have problems anymore. Easy solution, just get rich. And that was like the prevailing attitude at the time. So,
oh yes,
there was a big fear of dysgenics, of a growth of undesirable traits among the poor that would overwhelm the better traits of the superior people. It was pervasive enough to make it into a story about Christmas.
Yep.
Is that when the whole the idea of laziness being like as sinful as it does become in a modern sense?
Those traits start becoming genetic, rather than just
right
for an individual.
Okay.
Yeah, they're going into like that weird type of. Well, after Darwin, you had that Spencer dude.
Yep.
That basically took the theory of evolution, like in a weird way, towards like humans.
Social Darwinism. Yep.
So
actually, was the one who was like the stronger will survive or whatever, like that famous phrase. So yeah, that is
social Darwinism.
Darwinism, and that's bad.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So
it's laissez-faire with social Darwinism stuff. That is
well, this is a takedown of that written in 1843, and like there was a rip on the USA before, I believe. There was
yes.
But like you got to realize at this point the Civil War was still 20 years in the future.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the country was still in its westward expansion. Texas was a independent country when this was published, which was for exactly 9 years. So it hit that window pretty well.
Steven's still bitter about it.
Yeah.
Do what?
Steven's still bitter about it.
No, I'm not going to go over the top, but like you learn Texas history when you go to school in Texas, But yeah, from 1863 to 1845, Texas was an independent nation, and this was published, I don't know when it was written, but published December 19th, 1843.
Was it published as a series in a thing? What he usually did?
I think you're right.
Yes. Yeah. So was the omnibus published then, or was it first?
It might be the first. I'd have to look again. I just saw. So whatever was published first was 1843, which is probably the first or December 19th.
The start of the serial.
Yeah, probably the first bit.
Yeah.
Kelly, do you want to go some more, or do you think that's enough for one night? Or
No, I definitely want to get through at least the first ghost, at least.
oh, we're not done with the first ghost yet. All right,
No.
cool. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to turn off my camera. Kelly, you're going to do your thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to step away and listen on my phone because I have to go. I have to get something to eat.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we are not trying to beat John Webster's Return of the King stream.
What? How long was that thing?
It was almost 5 hours, just shy of 5 hours.
There is no way. I will kill people.
Longer than the
Movie, yeah.
All right, Steven, go. Yeah, go
Okay,
get
well,
it.
do your thing, but
go get some
I'm here.
food.
I'm listening
All right.
because this story is so good. All right.
All right. And we shall carry on. All right. His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. My time grows short, observed the spirit. Quick. This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past. It matters little, she said softly. To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me. But if it can cheer you and comfort you in time to come, as I have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has displaced you? He rejoined. A golden one. This is the even-handed dealing of the world, he said. There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth. You fear the world too much, she answered gently. All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not? What then? He retorted. Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you. She shook her head. Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until, in good season, we could improve our worldly function by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man. I was a boy, he said impatiently. Your own feeling tells you that you were not what you were, she returned. I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you. Have I ever sought release? In words? No, never. In what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end. In everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, said the girl, looking mildly, but with steadiness upon him, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? No. He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition, in spite of himself, but he said with a struggle, You think not? I would gladly think otherwise if I could, she answered. Heaven knows. When I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, Can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You who, in your very confidence with her, weigh everything by gain, or choosing her, if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so. Do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you, with a full heart, for the love of him you once were. He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed. You may, the memory of what is past, half makes me hope you will, have pain in this, a very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly, as an unprofitable dream, from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life you've chosen. She left him, and they parted. Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more, conduct me home. Why do you delight or torture me? One shadow more, exclaimed the ghost. No more, cried Scrooge. No more, I don't wish to see it. Show me no more. But the relentless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene and place, a room, not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like that last that Scrooge believed it was the time until he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge in his agitated state of mind could count, and unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, they were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily and enjoyed it very much, and the latter soon, beginning to mingle in the sports, got pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What would I have not given to be one of them? Though I never could have been so rude. No. I wouldn't for the wealth of all the world have crushed that braided hair and torn it down, and for the precious little shoe I wouldn't have plucked it off. God bless my soul to save my life, as to measuring her waist in sport, as they did, bold young brood, I couldn't have done it. I should have expected my arm to have grown round it for a punishment, and never come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked, I own, to have touched her lips, to have questioned her, and she might have opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of her downcast eyes, and never raised a blush, to have let loose waves of hair, an inch of which would be a keepsake beyond price. In short, I should have liked, I do confess, to have the lightest license of a child, and yet to have been man enough to know its value. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she, with laughing face and plundered dress, was borne towards it, the center, flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and the struggling, and the onslaught that was made on the defenseless porter, the scaling him with chairs for ladders, to dive into his pockets, to spoil him of brown paper parcels, hold on tight by his cravat, hug him round his neck, pummel his back, and kick his legs in irrepressible affection. The shouts of wonder and delight with which the development of every package was received. The terrible announcement that the baby had taken in the act of putting a doll's frying pan into its mouth, and was more than suspected of having swallowed a fictitious turkey glued on a wooden platter. The immense relief of finding this a false alarm, the joy and gratitude and ecstasy, they were all indescribable alike. It is enough that by degrees the children and their emotions got out of the parlor, and by one stair at a time up to the top of the house, where they went to bed, and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside, and when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life. His sight grew very dim indeed. Belle, said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon. Who was it? Guess. How can I? Tut, don't I know? She added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. Mr. Scrooge. Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and it was not shut up, and he had a candle inside. I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat alone, quite alone in the world, I do believe. Spirit, said Scrooge in a broken voice, remove me from this place. I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost, that they are what they are. Do not blame me. Remove me, Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it. He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which, in some strange way, there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer. In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him. He seized the extinguisher cap, and, by a sudden action, pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. End of stave 2.
Is that the end of the first ghost?
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny though. I was like, it's a fun like visual thing.
Yeah.
Put the cap over it and it just
Like I'm thinking of like my ex-girlfriend's new man like saw me and like they're talking now they're talking trash about me.
Yeah.
Like that burns.
Yeah.
I think he felt sorry for Scrooge when he saw it.
Yeah. They felt sorry for him.
Yeah. He said his partner is like on the verge of death, and it's just like, oh my gosh, that is awful.
Yeah.
How oblivious was Scrooge?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Making money.
Yeah.
Was he oblivious or was he just trying to ignore what he was feeling?
Well, his girl was saying that his dream was gain, like that gain. That is what he is after.
Yeah.
That's my favorite line in the whole story, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Yeah.
It's like holding up a mirror to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, it's good advice. You have to face your past in order to heal and grow from it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't by ignoring it.
Yeah.
And it's only a 3-step, not a 12-step process for Scrooge here, but like that feeling of isolation, because he when he finally goes to his old girlfriend's house, he sees what he could have had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Shoulda, coulda, woulda.
It's like it's full of like an absolute madness of like children, but there's so much joy in it. Like the room is bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I would be It is not my ideal situation. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
I get the joy in the moment, I really do. But as somebody with like a social anxiety problem, like I want to approach that situation with a flamethrower.
Were they observing from outside the window, or were they in the room? Yeah, like I think they were in the room, and I just can't imagine, like, Ebenezer being like, instead of 40 children acting as one, each one was acting like 40.
Which is exactly the description of if you put that many children in a room. Yeah.
I mean, it stands exponentially. Like, one child is like, that's all, like, handful. And then, like, you do 2 children, and it's like having 4. It's like, it just grows. It's just chaos.
Yeah.
Like, chaos agents.
The thing is, there was a great deal of love. There was a lot of chaos and a lot of energy, but it was all joyous. Which
yeah, and he is pretty alone in the world, except for
self-imposed, chasing things that aren't in the end fulfilling, which is the whole point of the story.
Yeah.
Gain. Yeah. When is enough?
Where are we in the book, Kelly?
Okay, so we are up to the second ghost.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't mind if we stopped here, only because tomorrow, if we start with the third ghost is so dark. Like, that chapter is so dark.
How are we, like, are we halfway?
Yes.
Okay.
It's about it's exactly 68 pages. Sorry, guys. Sorry. And we are on page
one more page.
and we are on page 45. So
we're
past halfway.
So this is as good a place as any to call it for the evening.
Okay, yeah.
And then tomorrow night, same bat time, same bat channel, we'll conclude the story. And to anybody that wants to join, like, I'm going to do it again. Come join us. Put on your ridiculous Christmas sweater or your pajamas.
Grab your warm beverage, adult beverage. I have hot cocoa. Yeah. Again, pajamas encouraged. Gay apparel.
Yes.
Don it.
And if that means you show up in drag, that's fine.
Yes. Just don that gay apparel.
Your gayest apparel.
Yes.
6 p.m. tomorrow?
Yeah, same time, 6 p.m. Eastern.
So it'll be like a regular Here Be Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just, it will be the regular Here Be Dragons time. Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who's going to be here. Kelly and I will be here. I imagine these two will be back.
Yep.
But yeah, anybody that wants to just jump on screen and share their thoughts about the story while Kelly's taking her 5 to 10 minute drink break between bits, come on and join us. So, but yeah, I think this is a good place to stop. We're going to call it an evening. Everybody who is here, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. The story is so much darker.
It's
so much more, and a lot more heart too, as well.
It is Charles Dickens.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, if you've never had the original
industrial, like, city, like, background, it's like all like the children in the factories, poorhouses, all of that.
I remember reading A Tale of Two Cities in high school, and then I remember that I have read the story. I remember almost something else from the story.
I just 2 years ago on Christmas Eve was the first time I ever heard the story. Like, I'd seen the Muppet version and Scrooge and probably some kind of high school stage play, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But I'd never experienced the original story, and it's part of our tradition now. And thank everyone here for joining us for our little our Christmas tradition at Here Be Dragons. And Kelly, Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thanks,
You
Kelly.
were a great.
And I will say thank you to everybody here and everybody in the chat. Thanks for hanging out with us. And again, Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Merry
So-
Christmas.
See y'all tomorrow.
So hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. And until then, peace and be excellent to each other.
Stay warm.
And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year and Happy Kwanzaa.
Low Saturnalia.
Happy Hanukkah. Whatever.
Festivus. Don't forget Festivus.
Whatever it is you celebrate, this is a time of year where people gather to celebrate with friends and family. And I just hope that all of y'all get to do that. And you're safe out there, especially we Americans who are dealing with a pretty bad winter storm, most of us right now. So Be careful out there. Take care of yourself. And hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. Bye, everyone.